I'm Johnny Hamill, and welcome to Jammin' with Johnny, KC Bass Stream. I have a unique way of life as a bass player and music educator. I felt like having a podcast long overdue. I'll talk shop with all my creative friends and shine light on things happening in KC. Today's episode is with Jason Heath, the one and only from Contrabass Conversations. Jason's been doing a podcast on bass playing for the longest person I know, and he is the king of it. So I am honored and a little intimidated to have a simultaneous podcast where we'll put it out on the KC Bass Stream and on the Contrabass Conversations. Jason is a wonderful bass player, so I also want to highlight the fact that he's a talented bassist, could be a professional bass player, but he sees the good in putting his efforts into the podcast, which is one of the main reasons that inspired me to make Kansas City Bass Stream. As usual, we hope you like our YouTube pages or Podbean, and we would love for you to check out the Patreon page if that's something you would be into. Thanks.
I'm so glad you're doing this. So it's so cool.
Yeah.
Who have you had on so far?
I'm on my published 7th episode, and it all started with like my senior student, who was episode 1, was leaving for the Navy. Like she went to and so I was like, well, I got to record this because her, like I wanted to document the student's journey. And that's really what the key of my podcast is for, like high school kids, to hear other high school kids' story of why they play the bass and why they got, in her case, very good. But, she was like, well, she was a runner and a scientist, and like she wanted to do everything. And I looked at her and I was like, you don't have to be a professional bass player. That's not why I started you as a kid, and that's really important information. And so her episode is so great because she talks about how the bass has really helped her in everything that she does. The challenges and playing together, pulling her out of her own, she's really quite the competitor. So she took that idea of knitting together and making one big artwork in orchestra, and now it's great because she said, "Oh, I'm not going to play the bass again," but she got to the Naval Academy and found out that she could play, and so they're having her play all the time. I mean, she got to play like the Carmen Fantasy in front of the whole Naval Academy, and like minds were blown. They didn't know the bass could do that, so she's representing us well.
Wow.
And then I had, of course, Hans and Lloyd. I kind of started with the people who have really helped me start the Kansas City Bass Workshop, because it's also about telling that story about what happened in the last 13 years, which has been an extraordinary journey. My young bass students, and also the artists in Kansas City, which, I grew up playing original music in Kansas City, so I love hanging with some of my literally kids from growing up are like some of the most creative musicians I know, and they're just hanging out. So I just have them on here, talk for an hour or so, play some music our history, and the people I jammed with and make music with all the time. And of course, a lot of these are professional musicians too. So it really runs the gamut. And I just, it just kind of fell into place, kind of like the workshop. It seemed like it augmented everything we were doing. And of course, the pandemic didn't hurt that I learned how to use the computer over the last 2 years a little bit more.
I'm sure.
Because I'm sure, just like you, I say you're my you're my guru because you know everything about all of this stuff. Like you are. I'm very. My thing is very humble and small, but I'm really amazed at how powerful. Like it's not just broadcasting to my studio students. It's not just broadcasting to people in Kansas City. It's going around the world, and that's important because the bass family is so large, and there's so many bass players out there, and that's I can't wait to talk to you about. Like, I don't even know if we've ever had this conversation. How much you realize what you're doing for all of us bass players in the Contrabass conversations. Like, I don't know if you know, like I'm sure, like me, you just kind of stumbled into it and like, this is cool, I like doing it, and your spirit is so wonderful. But, like I'll just hit Contrabass conversations and go down the wormhole and just walk away so inspired. And so you've documented everything in that regard.
Well, thanks, Johnny. It's cool. And right back at you. Everything you do is I just love any chance to hang out with you and follow along and what you do. And yeah, it's funny. I have realized kind of what it is because like at least for me, my experience, and it's I'm sure the same for you or similar for you. The podcast is kind of two things. It's like a weekly show, but it's also this spoken word archive of the story of the bass through the people who play it, teach it, and then as people pass away, as people grow up, who I talked to when they were little and now they're older, and I sort of realized that the oral history of it is, and the way that it persists, and I go back in the archives back to 2007, and I was like, oh wow, 35,000 people listened to that Ed Barker interview, over the years. So you sort of, but at the same time, what we're doing isn't solitary because we're talking to each other right now, but it's a little solitary. Like I'm sitting in my living room like a weirdo talking into the computer, and so it does. Though I intellectually realize that it goes out the way it does, it still doesn't feel. It still feels like kind of a solitary activity. So it's just one of the peculiarities of this kind of work.
Yeah. Well, I should ask you because I'm interested in like. How did it get? How did you how long have you been doing it, and when did you first start doing it, and why did you first start doing it? Because that would be great. I mean, I just told you why I started mine, but like it was hazard for me, but or haphazard. But let me hear your story. I want to hear it.
Yeah, well, it was January 1st, 2007 was episode 1. And I'd been thinking about it since like maybe 2005, 2006. Because in 2005, I discovered podcasting. I had my iPod video with that little tiny screen. I remember downloading Lost off the iTunes store and watching Lost. And it's just hilarious now thinking about watching Lost and something the size of like 4 postage stamps. Like who would do that? But I got into it and I started discovering all these tech podcasts, and I thought, is there a bass podcast? And there was. The Double Bass podcast by, I believe his name was or is Peter Jones. He was the bass player or is the bass player, not sure, haven't looked it up recently, in the Tenerife Symphony. And he'd done like 4 podcasts or 5 podcasts, and then he quit. He'd already quit before it even got to be a thing, really. And so I thought, oh, well, it'd be fun to start a show, and I started, and it was, and there was the break in the natural rhythm of work over the last couple of years with everything going sideways in the pandemic. For me, I had just decided to go back to school and do something else and not try to freelance anymore. And so I had a little more free time. And so it was just one of those things that came out of having free time. And it was, I wasn't sure where it was going to go. And I did it for a while, and then I quit for a while too. And then I came back in 2015, and I quit for about 5 years. I didn't do it. And you can trace the day I quit to the day I started teaching full-time high school orchestra. So that's what happens when you get busy. Yep.
Well, I should say, you asked me how many people so I have 7 episodes, but I have like today I was trying to edit it and get it up Sean Conley's episode, which is just great because me and Sean go way back to the George Vance days, and we talk about his teacher, George Wellington. I mean, it just goes and goes and goes with it. And the biggest thing is that, and so I have one episode of that already recorded, and I have another great episode of two of my students are twins, and they're in their second year of college. So since it was spring break here, I recorded like 4 episodes in the can, and I'm learning how to edit them a little bit better. And I kind of talked to you, I'm like, I just chose the video cast instead of the podcast or the audio. I don't know if I just think it's more appealing to somebody watching it. They can always listen to it if they want, like it's both. But I don't know if that's if I should also figure out how to upload it to some audio service. I don't know if that's something that needs to be done.
Whatever you want to do, it's like people people connect with things in different ways, and it's funny for me because if we go there have actually been video this gets so nerdy and it's of interest to a diminishing number of people, but I'll nerd out for a second. Like there were back in 2005, 2006 video podcasts specifically. This was before YouTube, and so you would upload these giant video files and they download, and you had to be on Wi-Fi, and then YouTube came along and sort of supplanted the need, if that's the right word, the need for that. Though there still are some video podcasts, but generally what I see these days is people will do whatever, video or not. If they have video, upload to YouTube. Why not? Because I like watching long form things. I generally am someone who's listening, so I'm like at the gym or doing the dishes or walking the dog, and so I like long form audio for that. But I also sometimes like long form audio, like late at night and just like listening to some conversation. And Katie Thoreau, the great jazz bassist out here in California, started a podcast called The Hump, and I subscribe to it on my audio podcast player, but I actually mostly watch the videos on YouTube because I just like watching the back and forth. So however you want to do it, it's beautiful, and it's going to be there. However you do it, it's there for people to run into, listen to as the audience builds, listen to right when it comes out, but also like run into as they start to learn more about the bass and learn more about all the people in the circles that you travel.
Yeah, well, I just looking back, because even the first 2 episodes were recorded last summer, Hans and Lloyd and stuff, and I just think, even both of those at the end of the episode, I was like, well, we need to have you guys come back like every 20 episodes because we have so much history. We just talk about stuff, and I wanted their episodes especially to be an overview of our history, KC bass, and also their art, So, it has wonderful, like Hans wrote a song about Kansas City barbecue, and it's on their album, and it's really great. And I'm honored that he wrote that. And then, of course, Lloyd, our friendship goes. So that's really nice, because sometimes when people, like, the thing about the workshop is that it's every 5 to 10 years, it's a generational switch. And as you know, there should be a workshop in every town, because, the parents can't take their kids across America. Sometimes they will, but they need it in their own hometown. And we need more young bass teachers, with their own thing. Like, we need that. That's how the real revolution starts, right? We have, 20 young, why not? Cellists have 20 cello studios in every town, and they could have their own little workshop in each town. And then, of course, as professionals, then we have these great things to go to across the world, so it's already getting there. I love what happens across the world as far as young bassists. It's just really inspiring. I just did it in my town, and I think everybody should have their little podcast too.
Yeah, and the more it's a rising. What's the rising tide lifts all boats, whatever that is, and that's one of those things that I think. If you go back a couple generations, maybe the prevailing attitude would not have been a rising tide lifts all boats. But I follow a lot of comedians and comedy podcasts and all this, and it's like we're all kind of building an audience together in our collective hometowns, like you. And it goes without saying, but you have inspired so many people to start something similar. Celito de Jesus in Long Beach.
Exactly.
Kick that off. I've been there with you. She when we talked about it, I did a video on it last summer. The first thing she said was when Johnny Hamill said, and so it's exciting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was important because obviously I started mine because George was urging me to start mine. And actually, and I looked at him like he was crazy, of course. Like what? Like anything. And it does take the bass family and the bass community, which is so lovely, for those people like Celito to say, hey, you could do this. And Celito does it so well because she's Celito, it takes a certain quality of bass player because you're going to get kind of pulled this way and that way. And it really takes, the person who runs a bass workshop should be a young bassist person because that's the core audience. Because if you start kids at age 3 or 5, like myself, they need a workshop for the next 10 to 15 years before they go off to college. They need a place to grow up, and the more important it is, the better. So that's why, I think let's see, Jessica's doing well in Austin. We started one in Minneapolis with Brian Rossler. And it's just everywhere. It's just been wonderful. I mean, all of them, all I did was say, I'll help you as much as I can, and this is why you should do it. Later, I want to read this thing that I wrote down for myself after the first year of doing the workshop, because I know I say George's name a lot, but it was just because when he would talk to me, he would tell me something, and then I was like, oh, that's a good piece of advice. But it was like 10 years later that you realized that he was talking about this, I think of him as the person pushing his finger in the pond, and then the wave goes out, and he was really kind of a humble guy, so it's nice to shout his name out a little bit because he'd be the last person to say his own name.
Well, all I can say is keep doing this, sir, because it's so. And so we have so many Venn diagrams. So I have 27 things to add on to what you said. So I'll try to organize my thoughts. Like you're talking about, connect with Lloyd and connect with Hans, and and you could have them on multiple times. And that's the beauty of this, because there is no end. If you just think about a talk show, which this is different, but it's not like name your actor of choice would just go on once. No, they go on all the times, multiple times. You and I have talked, I don't know how many times, a few at least for this. I think, and so there's just this beauty to that. Then that whole oral history thing, oh my goodness, do I wish we had gotten more of George Vance than we have. I put out a few years ago, Henry Perebrun, Tracy Rowell's husband.
I wrote it down, remember?
Yes, I know. So see, we have so much, our Venn diagram, Johnny, is so tight. But that's so cool. But it wouldn't have been great to have hours of that, or more video, so.
Well, that was the thing about that one was Henry and Tracy gave me that video a long time ago, right after George passed away. And I watched that thing all the time because George, most of that stuff he told me on the phone, every week or every month I call and be like, my student's doing this, what do I do? because he was my mentor, so he would just talk. And so I had that document that I just poured over. Like I went to it, all the time, and, it wasn't professionally recorded he just did it on video because he's sitting on the couch kind of, looking around, like his mouth, like he's not like this where we know if somebody's going to watch the video. They're just documenting for the audio. And so Martha was like, I don't want that out, but I was like, that information is so good. So I transcribed it. Christian Chisanek helped me too, because he was here during summer. And so I was like, hey, I'm almost done with this. Here, watch this. Do the last part. And he's like, sure. And then we got it published, and then you put it out, which is great because everybody needs to hear George's voice. Like, that's the best part about the Contrabass conversations of that. It's like, it's his voice, and that's really important to hear, because he's kind of calming voice. It's weird,
Well, it's advice that Andy Rosidi gave me years ago. I was saying, like, hey, who should I connect with? Because I used to ask that all the time, and he's like, start with the older generation, And I'm glad that I've connected with, as people pet, Inez, connected with, more blanking now, but like I've had several notable guests that have passed on, and it's just, and of course I wish I had done 5 more conversations with them, and then there's so many I'm talking to this I'm gonna go, this is great bass player here in San Francisco, 91 years old, Don Perel, and for his 90th birthday, he did the same thing to celebrate as he did for his 80th birthday, which is walk his double bass out into the Golden Gate Bridge and play a set.
I want to do that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that and a lot more. So yeah, I don't always connect, but I try to when the time is right, it's a beautiful thing to connect with the people, a couple generations ahead of me.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing that I like. What I think about mine was that I was just thinking, like, that idea of a young kid. Like, I know from teaching kids, like, as the kids that started, when they were 5 or 6, once they're in high school, then the 5 and 6 like are looking up at those kids like they're, they get more out of learning from those kids. Like, it's this beautiful family, and that's the amazing thing of the George Vance system, or the Suzuki system. Like, it helps everyone grow, and of course, I think like, everyone has to play together. It's not like high school where you're like, oh, we need to separate this. Like, for the bass studio, it's like everyone plays together. Even in Kansas City, like the professionals, the final concert, everyone plays together. So, like, this summer, Xavier Foley's going to play Irish Fantasy with all the kids, and they're gonna, like, their minds are blown. When Bach was here, he would play Raitba with them, and it was like, great. Lloyd leads his pieces with the kids, and they feel it. They feel that art, that artistry, and it pulls them up in a ways that is, you're never going to learn that in a book. That's why, individual concerts like that, bass concerts, at first when I first saw George doing his stuff, I just was like, oh, you're just having a bass concert at the end, the bass ensemble, just academic purposes, like, we're really here just to get a lesson, and it was like, it's so important because everybody's visually tracking the bow arm and feeling the sound come off of the professional's instruments. You know how that, I'm sure when you first heard your teacher play, or even better, when your teacher picks up your bass and makes your bass sound 20,000 times better, you're like, whoa, what a lesson, right? You know, like that kind of thing happens only at workshops, and you get this, and it's a very natural way for that to happen. It's not somebody pointing their finger down at it. It's more of that lifting up thing that's really cool.
It is. It is. Well, here in the Bay Area, we just had the San Francisco Winter Bass Bash. Nina DeCesar was our guest. And these students, you're talking about that generational, the young students going on. You see that at the Bass Bash. We start off with the sixth graders coming out and playing, and then the seventh graders and the eighth graders and the high school ensembles, and then the guest artist comes, and then the college students come, and the master classes happen, and then in the summer with the Golden Gate Bass Camp here in San Francisco, we have people that like Megan McDevitt, who went to the Golden Gate Bass Camp and then went to college and came back and was on faculty, and there's so many people and then the beautiful thing, and you and I have talked about this before, but the beautiful thing of uniting the bass community from the young students all the way to the professional players like that, like here in San Francisco, we've got bassists from the symphony, from the opera. We got Michael Mannering coming in, different styles. We got, and people look forward to it, and it's wild. It's wild to see, and it's such an important thing to have for your community too. I mean, it's important that parents can take their kids to something that's convenient, but it's also the other level. And I know you know this because you've had the festival running concurrently with the workshop. It's this beautiful way to celebrate the instrument in the community and celebrate the players in the community.
Well, that's. I mean, I want to say that about the podcast is something that I reflect on, like how amazing all these other things happened when I started doing the workshop. Because the first couple of years of the workshop, it just was viewed by the other Kansas City bass players as, oh, that's just Johnny's bass studio thing. It's a Rabat thing only. And of course, like that's George Vance, Rabat. I mean, they're like that, and that's true. And so I was like, what are you talking about? We do just as much jazz here as you want. All these teachers are here. They're jazz. You can come and just study jazz if you want. Or you want to play the electric bass? Fine, that's cool with me. Like, that's what I do. I play the electric bass, so come on. And, what I found was all these amazing things happened. One was that, the first year was just a small little faculty recital. You get half the kids to come back at night to see the professional play, and it was nice, but it wasn't exciting. But now, like, it's a bass fest, and like people come to Kansas City not to study, but they come just to see the concerts. It's crazy. Like, we had this one guy come all the way from Japan just to see the week of bass. What? Are you crazy? Like, mind-blowing. And that was, like, if you would say, oh, well, if you have to study to come see the concerts, then they wouldn't have even know that was happening. So if you have a bass fest, again, it allows a bass solo festival, a whole week solo bass festival. Whoever thought of that? Except for ISB, right? Like it's right there. And again, it can be in every town. It's easy to do, and it's really, really cool. So I found, for me personally, obviously having the workshop allows me to really dig. Like, I get inspired because, George came here, worked with my students, and you know how that feels when somebody that great is teaching your students. Francois taught my students, everyone from Lloyd to Hans to Nina, Ted Botsford, Sean Conley, all these people that just really did something. And as Tracy Rowell would say, sometimes you talk to your students about something, and then they go into that room and Francois like fixes them like that, and you're like, what did he say? And he said exactly the same thing you did, but it was time for them to really hear it. You know what I mean? And it needs that cycle type of thing that happens. And Francois would be the first one to tell you that, but I mean, he usually sees things that most of us don't. But that idea is really exciting. That when I think of the podcast on that already, I'm only 7 episodes in, but like the podcast with Xavier that I just published, like there was moments in that episode that you could see on my face that I was like, I had no idea. Like the question that he answered, like, was crazy. I had no idea that the Irish Fantasy was his first piece he wrote. Like, I gravitated towards that piece because after he played we had a small little, tiny mini workshop last Labor Day because the pandemic, I kind of snuck it in there in person. It was only like 20 kids. Like it couldn't have that many people because of, stand away from me, wear a mask, all that crazy stuff. But, so he just came, and he played, and then after his little recital, I mean, he just did a small recital. I think he played for 20 minutes, but that was the piece. Every kid in that place came up to me like, oh my God, I got to learn that one. And I was like, and that it was his first song that he wrote. It was so cool. But all of these things, like I didn't know Francois in my interview with Francois. Like he's telling the story of Raitba. Like, I don't know if you know, it's like on a lake, but like he has such vivid thing of each part of the music is something else. Like that happened in real life when he was he wrote it standing with his bass on the lake or on the shore of the lake in Senegal, Africa, like crazy. So the one part that goes ba-dum, 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 is the wind hitting his face, a sandstorm hitting his face.
Wow.
So cool. But I said, well, Francois, you've composed the whole time you've been playing the bass, right? And he just looked at me and goes, no, I composed because Quincy Jones asked me to. So the baseball, he was on the gig with Charles Aznavour or somebody, but Quincy Jones was producing the record, and he was the bass player, so he was just playing the bass, and he played a little bit of stuff with the bow, and he had a little bit of Desert, I think, like the main lick that he would play as a warm-up, in the corner, get the bow out and make sure the rosin's working. And Quincy was like, I like your bow stuff. Do you have more of your original pieces? And he was like, oh, yeah. He didn't. And then he went home and he was like, whoa. It was incredible because, I mean, I've heard that story, but I didn't know that was the reason why he became a composer. And, of course, it led to the big baseball album, and it was a big hit. And then he toured the world for, like, he didn't have to work. He didn't have to go work anymore. He just played songs.
It's crazy. Well, those are the stories that you want to have and you want to hear. That's the beautiful thing about doing that. I remember talking to Frank Proto years ago, and he just started telling all these Mingus stories. And Mingus was, his lesson was right before Frank's, I think, or was right after, or something like that. I mean, those are the sort of things. And there's that like multi-level beauty of doing something like a podcast, right? Because you have that initial conversation, and then it's like we're telling the story of the music world. And like I've done a few episodes, and the more you do, the more you probably will get ideas for something like this. But like, let's just tell Paul Ellison through the stories of all the people that studied with him, or let's have like a dozen people talk about their experiences with Francois. I've put out stuff like that, or things related to a topic of teaching. It's just beautiful because you're having these like conversations at different times with different people in different places, but you all are talking about similar threads, and you can unify, and it's wild. That whole like body of knowledge that you're building up by doing something like this kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, so I have this thing that I want to share with you, because this it seems like a great point to put in this thing, because again, this is a documentation of why you decided to make a bass podcast. The first thing was, it sounded like you looked up and nobody else was doing it, and I got some free time. By the way, the other reason why I started mine was I have a little bit more free time because I'm now Mr. Mom. I have my son, so I watch him, and I can edit video while he's napping and stuff. So
congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. So I felt like that was a great use of my free time, because he's not going to let me practice while he's trying to nap. The video editing takes a little bit more time than I thought sometimes, but I'm getting the hang of it. It's getting easier. I want to read this document that, as I said, George passed away. If anybody out there just doesn't know my story of George, I brought him here just for a one-day workshop. He worked with my students only, so I consider that the first Kansas City bass workshop. I didn't call it that. I was just like, hey, I'm going to bring the author of the book here, he's going to teach you. And it was wonderful. Just great learning experience for me. The kids loved him. He actually came twice. And then after the second time, he really wanted me to start my own workshop, because I would complain to him. I would say, hey, every year, even when ISB was only 5 hours drive away from Kansas City, I still only got 6 of my students to go. I have 40 students, and you would see those 6 students go to the workshop, and then they would come home electrified, and they would, you wouldn't have to tell them a reason why they should practice. They would just go and grow, it was worth the effort. But when it came down to it, he was like, well, you need it in your own town, because those kids can't keep coming all the way to, it took 2 days to drive to Washington D.C. with my daughter when I drove her across country and all that stuff. But let me read this. I'm going to share the screen and put it up there. Let me make sure I have it, just so people can read it. I wrote this down for myself because I didn't want, as the years go by, I didn't want to lose track of what George really kind of gave me, and what that clarity I had right then after the year after the first workshop. And it was really fantastic, because I was exhausted because the amount of work it went into, the amount of stress it took. It takes a lot from people, but I really, that idea, as I said, I didn't finish my story with George, I'm sorry. But anyway, we were on the phone for the last time, because he had pretty bad cancer, and he knew this was the last time we were going to talk on the phone, which I was, of course, like, no, you're going to beat this thing, trying to be positive. And he was so great. He was like, nah, this is the last time, John. I'm not talking to you after this.
Wow.
We're lucky we have this conversation. And he said, his words were, I won't be coming to that workshop you keep talking about, which, like a dagger through, we always, we must get up and do it. We must do the things to help other people. And the reason why I didn't want to do the workshop, because I knew it was going to be that much work, and I knew it was going to take away from my own practice time, which you're having a practice, you're supposed to be and you're like, I haven't touched it for like the last month. What are you, crazy? I've been just running around, making schedules, calling people, making t-shirts, whatever, answering the phone, it's a lot of work. It gets easier as the years go by, but it's a lot of work still. So anyway, I sat down and I wrote this to myself, and I think it's very important for us, like for you to understand that I said that about which one is it? This one? Sorry. Yes. Okay. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. And this really is kind of like a philosophy about what the workshop started to do. And I want to say this, I feel like the podcast, what you're doing, has done the same thing. Like it's exponential growth. And every, like that's what we really want to do. We want to put all our efforts in the maximum growth for all of us. And this is why I want to read it to you, because it's kind of nice. Some of this, I just want to touch on the fact that the first part was about Suzuki and how important it was that how the Suzuki Method works, which is all George really talked to me about was Dr. Suzuki. He didn't really talk about himself. It was always like we would study the violin one book about the mother tongue and playing by rote for a reason. And as I said, everybody plays together. You don't just you don't stop using the words. As Victor Wooten says, it's a language. So you get to not only talk to English, you get to practice your native tongue every day, but you also get to talk with professionals or virtuosos. That's why everyone becomes a virtuoso. So the Suzuki's idea of, he made a lot of great violinists, but he was really trying to make a great human being, like a great society of people through his teachings. And I think if you don't know more about Suzuki, then you guys should go look into him more. But anyway, I want to move to this paragraph. I'll just read it. Another factor that must be adhered to is the environment that the artist exists in. Music represents our language and our society, building upon itself over thousands of years. The ability to acknowledge that our language is always changing ensures that we can express ourselves in society, prepared to overcome any and all means of suffering and injustice. As in life, we see some events as setbacks, just as we view many events as moving forward. In music, the more we provide an environment of great artistry, the easier the mental handicap to advance disappears. This concept is more than just technique, but a unique way of thinking through life. Being able to creatively solve any issue you are facing is the greatest asset any generation can give the next. George Vance was adamant that a true artist, Francois Rabat, be commissioned to record the accompanying CD. Rabat, as a person, represents one of the highest levels of artistic mastery, creativity, and great humanity, thus providing a great model for the next generations. Vance also believed that group classes, performances, and workshops were key to foster bass players to let their natural abilities grow. Likewise, Dr. Suzuki embedded the belief that parents should provide such an environment and taught parents how to nurture that. And in that case, the parents starting very young. I think by the time you get to late high school and obviously college, the parents become a different role type of thing. I mean, still supportive, but it's there. So now this is really kind of more of my idea. Like, to me, that's all George's ideas that he gave to me, and this is almost more my philosophy, or I take it and put it into the Kansas City Bass Workshop. I'm going to skip that sentence because Johnny believes that many styles of music represent many great variations of cultures. Some cultures are older and some are younger, but each have their greatness. Therefore, no style of music is superior to the other. Additionally, there is hardly any style of music that does not have a bass line as an integral part of music. This is why the bass is such a great instrument to put one's life work into. This is also why the workshop focuses on classical and jazz traditions as well as all styles of music. Like, we don't have, like, this is the only thing that's going on in the Kansas City Bass Workshop. The workshop holds no boundaries to age, group style, or level of performance. The bass players have a tendency to be great listeners and supporters by nature. Therefore, it is only a matter of time that as we listen better to each other, we create a better world through music. John hopes that more people will start to understand this connection and continue playing the bass as more than a hobby. He also hopes that more parents will start their child on bass at a young age for these reasons. The week also works as a bass symposium in which great concerts open to the public that invites the whole region in to get inspired also. So that part is what I wanted to read, that idea. I just think that's what drives me the most, is that we think of the bass as, okay, I got to the bass because, I wasn't that good on the other instruments or something like that. But it's not true at all for me. Like, I play the bass because it was the greatest instrument. It like blew me away. And I think a lot of bass players now, that's an old paradigm that's gone almost, and when you get to the bass, you get all these, the genius of bass players is that they listen so much to everyone around them while they're playing the bass, and on top of that, like, you can have the violin, it's awesome, great instrument, but it's not in every kind of music, like the bass, there's a bass line in everything. Well, maybe Buddhist chant or unaccompaniment, but you get the idea. So that idea of taking this idea of Suzuki and moving it, to create a better world. Because Suzuki's system goes to science, math, any subject. You can take this idea of learning and breaking down the complexities. Like, we make things too difficult in our mind, and teachers can teach that to their students pretty quickly. If you think something's hard, like, that was what's so mind-blowing about George. He starts him in thumb position. When I saw that, I thought he was crazy, because I couldn't play up there very well. Like, I knew how to play the bass.
Well, it goes to what you told me years ago, which is the Bach First Suite. The Prelude's going to be a middle school piece, and it's one of those things that if you told Jason back when he was, in high school, I would have thought you were crazy. I mean, I played that on my master's recital, I think, and it's it's really wild how eliminating that fear by just introducing things in the brilliant way that he did. I mean, it's remarkable. It's beautiful. It's beautiful work you do too. I love your path and all the people that you've inspired and all these great artists that you bring, what you've done to Kansas City and what you've done to inspire people in other areas of the globe. And it's just, it's really exciting to watch what's transpired in the last 13 years since you've been doing this, and just like the course of where we're going.
Yeah. The workshop is the 13th year for Kansas City Bass Workshop. As I said, there was 2 years that I brought George in for a mini thing, but that's we're on our 13th year, which is hard to believe because I'm a kid at heart, because that's why I teach kids. It's because it's easy for me to act like that, because I'm like that. I don't really have too many negative thoughts naturally, and one of the things I think about you, knowing you, I'm sure we've all had our bad days, and we've said something like, but I never really have ever heard a negative thought come out of I've never heard you speak a negative thing about anything. I don't think, even the weather or something.
Yeah, I think we're similar in that way, Johnny. I remember you had like a rough moment at a camp, just personally something happened, but like we were recording this bass bass, but like you
yeah.
like still like radiated this positivity. You just had there's this like the beautiful approach that you seem to have to life that just goes through into your music making and your teaching and your enthusiasm for what you do, and you're a natural organizer. It seems like to me, if anyone's natural, or you seem to be anyway, and you're such a natural at just this kind of flow like we're doing now. I'll tell you something that you probably didn't know. I think you were one of the first podcast guests where I basically didn't do any editing at all, because I was
wow.
You know what? This conversation just flowed like it should. And as I've done more of this, I think we're coming up on episode 900. This may be episode 900 actually when it comes. I know it's a lot of episodes, but as I've done more of it, I've learned just to let conversations breathe. And unless like the doorbell rings or like someone has a coughing fit or something, the human brain kind of filters out a lot of what you might think is the circuitous speech patterns and stuff. And like early on, I would edit people. I remember we brought up Lloyd Goldstein, something that we both love. I've had Lloyd on multiple times. I was really into editing when I first had Lloyd on, and I made Lloyd. If you would go back and listen to that first talk, he's a beautiful human, and everything he's expressing is beautiful. But I almost made him sound a little artificial because I cut all the natural spots and pauses and all this, and like Lloyd would take his time and express a point, and I was like so concerned with like just like making everything like and probably subconsciously like controlling everything. And like as I've done more and more, it's just like let people speak, let things flow, and take the foot off the editing pedal. But you were the first person where I was just like, you know what? This is beautiful. We're just going to let it rip. And it was you. We talked all about your path and this. I think maybe you were featured in the. Golly, what were you featured in? Were you featured in the newspapers? I don't remember. You've been featured in many things and many over the years, but it was one of those like I didn't need an excuse to connect with you, but there was an excuse, and then we did, and it was a beautiful thing, and it's just great. We've had a bunch of adventures and misadventures over the years, and
I like both. I like all of the adventures. It doesn't matter which ways it goes. And
Me too.
And so it's. I mean, sometimes I say that to a lot of people, like, hey, as I say, sometimes even when it's the most stressful situation at what you described to me, and I believe, I think I get migraines, so I think I had a migraine that day, or they getting rid of it, and I have to take migraine pills, and it kind of makes me blah. But, like, for some reason, even when I'm having a bad day, it really, or the stress, people don't know that I have the stress. Like I'm just still happy. But of course, I work with kids. You can't not be happy around a kid.
Yeah.
There's some people I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't teach kids. Like you're just not wired that way. So you teach high school kids. They can use you. They can use you a lot because. Conversely, sometimes, like, when I taught public school, they were like, you gotta yell at these kids, and I was like, come on, man, I don't really need to yell, do I? But, I mean, I learned to yell, and I can yell, but I don't really want to, so some people, right on them, and they need that, they need the big the public school teacher voice, and everybody shuts up and starts working. That paper, I wanted to say that because just to bring it back to that, because I want to make sure that that idea of the workshop and getting workshops all over the world, really, like when I think of your podcast, 900 episodes, like you're doing more to make that actually happen, of getting a little bass into a 3-year-old's hand, because who knows who stumbles across a podcast about a bass. Maybe they're into fishing and they accidentally get on yours, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, this is cool, and I have a 3-year-old kid. I should start them on bass, not violin or piano. Not that I don't think all the other instruments are great, but I just wanted that statement is very important, because there is something really, really valuable or special, not valuable too, but special about our bass family. And the only way that I knew that is because I accidentally showed up to the ISB, the Rice one, I believe it's 97 or 98, I can't remember. And I met George there, and I witnessed Ray Brown and John Clayton, Christian McBride, Rufus Reed, Michael Moore, Mark Dresser, and the list goes on of all of our heroes, which turns out those people are just your bass family too, as you know. Like it's first time I talked to Francois, I was like, but he's so cool, like I can't think of anyone. Vic Wooten like talks to me like I'm his best friend. Never met me, but I play the bass and I teach bass, and he loved me like that. And he's so great, I don't know. That's kind of neat that I just want to point that out to everybody listening. Everybody should, like your podcast is like this great, rich thing that is really important. I don't ever really foresee that my podcast would ever get to episode 900, because I don't know if I still I'm going to go teach a bunch of kids, and at some point maybe 1-2 a month or something to keep it going, because it's been so wonderful. But it's not you're doing it, and you really, I see this, that you really fell in love with it. Like you didn't just keep doing it because you had a lot of free time. Like you learn from these things so well. Yeah.
Trying.
So,
but I did take 5 years off because I life got busy, and then when I came back to it in 2015, I decided I was going to pretend this was my job, and it kind of, in a way, so it's a complicated story, but it kind of became my job, and so it's something that I'm just sort of like a part of, like it's kind of got its own life, and I just and doing something specifically in the world of bass is so cool because of all the things you just described, that immediate connection that you have to the people that would be, that are really the top of the field. It's something that I'm sure some other instruments have that to an extent, but I'll bet a lot don't. In fact, I'm pretty sure a lot don't. So
every violinist, every cellist, every guitar player, because I live in the world of rock and roll too, they'll come to the thing and they're just like, I'm so jealous that I don't play the bass because we don't have this. And that's really important for bass players out there to know that that's, to me, to show them the bass family is so important, because like part of that confidence building thing, like you made me feel confident because you were like, let's do this podcast together. I was like, this is great, like the fact, I say you're the king of podcasts to me, because your flow is good. I listen to mine, I'm like, oh, I'm not flowing. I don't think I'm flowing very well myself, but like you have it down. Obviously I might have to go and listen to your first podcast to critique you, but I don't think everything I've ever heard of yours is just like, wow, he's so good at that.
Well,
and
I appreciate it. I could definitely point you to some where the flow is off. I had this hilarious piece of software, and now part of it was like, I didn't know what I was doing. There was that. But I will blame a little bit on this one. I had this piece of software, this Acer laptop, and I would record the audio, and the audio would slowly get out of sync, and I would get ahead of the guest, I think, if I remember, because what would happen was they would be talking, and all of a sudden I would go like, oh, and like laugh, and then they'd crack a joke, and there'd be dead silence. And so it was like, Like there are definitely some pretty, and I remember trying to edit, and it baked it into one audio track. So there was no escape. So like I remember, I'd have to dig back. Maybe someday if I wanna laugh, I'll dig it. But yeah, it's one of those. It's just like anything you do in life. You just keep doing it. And I've loved what I've listened to you of yours so far. And like I said, I think your flow is on point. You were the first person I was like we were probably like 250 podcasts in at that point when we first talked, and I was like, this is great. So it's cool. It's fun to do. It's great to, everybody's got a different take on the music world. Everybody's got a different experience. Everybody's got a different way that they like to approach this kind of thing. And so I'm looking forward to following along with what you continue to do. And I'm following along with Katie Thoreau, and I'm following along with a few other instruments. And it's a beautiful thing. Anytime I see somebody that I had on that's on Katie's podcast, I'm like, hey, I'm going to listen, and it's really fun. And I'm that same way with tech podcasts and cooking podcasts. And so I think it's it's like we're creating a family here. So
I have to admit, I don't really listen to too many podcasts other than yours. So that's.
Oh, I appreciate it.
There's a local podcast here for local kids and musicians, but it's called Wednesday Night Drinking Practice, and everybody just drinks and talks, and it's really silly, but they kind of talk about Kansas City music scene. So I listen to those. But it's usually just because it's, what are they going to say next? But so it's almost more comedy. So yours is definitely more me soaking in this information. And, the times that I do listen to podcasts the most is when I'm traveling somewhere, like long car ride.
Well, you're going to get a lot of that as you keep doing this, because I'll have someone come up and they'll be like, I listened to you for 17 hours. I'm so sick of that whatever ad I had in So it's funny. But I do the exact same thing. I think like, I'm going to take this long drive, and all of a sudden I'll listen to like 9 hours of Tim Ferriss or something. So and the people do start to get to know you in a interesting way. Like a lot of people know you because you're a prominent figure in the bass world anyway, but there's something about the podcast and listening to that voice. People come up and start talking to me, and I know a lot of other people too, in a very familiar way, because they feel like they do know me in a lot of ways. And so I've had that happen, and then someone will come up and be like, you two must go way back, and I'm like, no, I have no idea who that person is. I just but it's a beautiful thing, and that's the best kind of, we'll use fame very loosely, like in our like micro niche. That's the best and YouTubers talk about that too. That's
base famous is a little bit different than fame.
Base fame, or like some of the, I follow a lot of YouTube channels, personal organization channels, and it's the sort of thing where like you can go to Costco and go to Safeway and whatever, and no one knows who you are except the people who really care about what you do. And then they'll come up and they'll be like, thank you, every once in a while. That's the best, not like Kim Kardashian kind of or anything like that, I'm sure. So not comparing us to her, I guess I did, but you know what I mean. But like that's that sort of like community organizer, which is definitely something I'd label you as proudly. I'm sure I put that label on myself too in a different way. But that's the kind of, it's like doing work that people care about and it gets to the right people. And obviously that's, you've connected with so many people, and just having something regular and long form like that, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, like, as I said, like, first I have my students, and I've been teaching, like, since I was in high school, really. Like, I've taught all through college because I was a rock musician, and I was on stage playing fast and rock band loud. So people would come up to me and literally say, I need to learn to do that. And they would I didn't know who they were, and I would, okay, I'll figure out how to teach you. And it was really cool. I'm kind of a natural teacher. I mean, I learned to teach, obviously. My first years of teaching were like a little sketchy, but I really loved doing that. And as you snowball into that idea of, it goes further and further into what we do as bass players in teaching, like it was my students first, like their parents would look at me and they say, "You are changing my son's life." And I'd be like, "What? I'm just teaching him the bass, you know?" And that was the first 10 years of teaching. And I was still into playing, you know? And I'm still a bass player. Like if you leave me in a room with a bass, I'm not going to come out. You got to come get me. I got to set an alarm on my phone because I'm going to start playing, and I don't care if I'm starving to death. I'm probably still going to be practicing. You know, that feel like I don't have any problem ever practicing for as long, you know, I'm just going to play until I get it or go down this creative thing. All I need are 4 strings and I'll just go. And I'm an artist. Like, I compose, I play, and I've always been that. When you wrestle with that compared to teaching, like, it's always been this kind of two-headed thing, which means that you, as a teacher, you still gotta play and you still gotta perform. But if you only are a performer and you don't teach, it's almost like you're not giving back, you know? Like, so these, you know, like I've met some performers that were great, but they didn't really teach, and you could see it, you know? And that's the other thing I love about you, is that you're a great teacher. I know you don't teach as many students right now because you, as you said, the podcast kind of took over, which is wonderful. You're teaching kind of in a different manner. But that juxtaposition between you're playing, but you still play. Your bass is still right there. You still probably will get a little lost in your bass if we let you, like me. And that artistry is really important, I think, for you to find. This is probably where I want to like play your video of you playing some stuff, because I think that's the other issue. I don't know if I didn't know you and you're playing on the bass, you know, you on the videos you play a little bit, but you don't play, you know, like you don't perform. You're like demonstrating some things and stuff, but people might not realize how monstrous of a bass player you are. Like,
well, thanks,
you know what I mean? Like, so I said that about me. I've been playing music since I was in kindergarten. I was a drummer first, and then I started playing the bass in 8th grade, and I literally just I didn't want to do anything else but play the bass. So that idea of being consumed by music, a true artist, and you kind of are similar. I can't remember, when did you start playing the bass?
Yeah, right around the same time. 7th grade, switched over from violin, and then never really looked back. And I decided, you know, I've performed a lot, but I decided, as I started to do this content creation thing that I've been doing, I guess for over 15 years at this point, you know, in some capacity. I just decided not to market myself as a bass player in terms of that. So I play, and in playing happens, but I've just never, and I do a lot of orchestral playing. I sub pretty frequently with the San Francisco Symphony. It's probably like what I do the most of now. But I've never really the last several years focused on me. You know, like I like the community aspect, and I like featuring people, and like you said, I'll do demonstration videos, and bass playing will happen. But it's just but never say never. Who knows? Ask me in 5 years. Maybe I'll be doing something totally different.
Well, but I mean, what I'm saying is that you actually, you know, like, for me as a bass player, I love doing my little solo stuff. I have a new record coming out. We'll play it here at the end. But solo bass record, who would thought, you know, I never thought I would ever put out a solo bass record of my own solo. You're like, what? No way. I'm a bass player. I'm supposed to be playing the bass line. And even like after the first ISBs, after the first George Vance, at the end of George, I look up George, I'm like, now I get to go back to playing the bass line instead of all these solos. And he'd laugh. He's like, yeah, exactly. You know, like we all love to be in the bass playing. You know, like the thing about the bass is it means so much, even if it's not a hard part, you know, like it's, you take it away and the music falls apart. So that is, I just, you know, a lot of people, when they see teachers and podcasters maybe too, they might not realize that you're passionate and driven about playing the bass, right? And can probably outplay most people out there. I'm not, you know, I don't mean to put it in competition, but you could get people to not, you know, like when I first started doing the workshop, I had people come at me like, oh, you're supposed to be this great jazz musician, great, you know, classical musician, and I'm a really good musician. I'm a really good bass player. But, you know, like, I'm not Charles Mingus, and I'm not Edgar Meyer, and I'm not, you know, like I like to do it all, and I probably teach kids the best. But that idea of where, so it took me a while to find that where my artistry was satisfied, right? And where my teaching was, and, you know, the workshop and everything, you know, like, as I said, that's why I didn't do the workshop at the beginning, was because I was struggling between my artistry and the organizational things that we had. So what do you feel like? So you're passionate about playing in the symphony the most, and I learned, because, you know, you got long hair. I thought you were like me. You were a rock and roller, but you actually are like a classical guy.
Well, my path is quite similar to a lot of folks. I was at the Andres Martin's wonderful event in Tijuana several years ago, and we were all sitting around a table, like 7 or 8 of us, and we're all like, "How'd you get into bass? Heavy metal." So me too. My first band was Toxic Death, and I never. So for me, it's interesting. Like everybody's got a different way that they express their creativity. For me, my bass playing, I don't know if this is depressing or not, but my bass playing is not really where my creativity comes out. I like the creating the content around the bass, that sort of thing. I kind of feel like that's my craft. I dabble, like, you know, I got my Ableton Push right here, and I like making beats and experimenting. And so but in terms of like the actual bass playing I do, it's like, it's pretty, it's just kind of what I fell into, symphonic performance. That's like really what I do. And then as I go to a decent number of bass events, you know, as my wacky career has unfolded. So I play a lot of solo stuff, bass ensemble stuff. So I get some of that, but I've never really, you know, but again, never say never. Talk to me in 5 years. Maybe you'll see the Jason Heath solo album coming at some point. So
I'm ready for it. Well, I mean, and that's what I mean. Like, you know, actually 5 years ago, I would never, you say, where's your solo bass album? I'm like, I've written, I have all my albums. I have them, I've been putting them out since I was in high school, really. And, you know, I think, you know, like, I've just always been on records and Kansas City artists, but it's usually somebody else. You know, I might have even wrote half the songs, but I wrote them on bass, and I'm just playing the bass line to the song, which sometimes is hard, sometimes it's not, you know, like, it just depends on what it is. And but it's music, you know, and that's really great. And I did do a lot of solo bass playing in the early days. Billy Sheehan was my guy. I sat around and I could do this, and I could play ridiculously fast when I was young on the electric bass. But that, where, like you just mentioned, a key aspect of probably why your podcast is so wonderful, and all your online content stuff, is like, you're taking a lot of your creative capital and putting it there, as you said. And, you know, one of the nice things about doing certain gigs that you've done for a long time is you get to just show up, play your part and enjoy that sound and enjoy all those people around you, enjoy connecting to the audience, and then you get to put it away and go home, and you didn't have to practice 20,000 hours before that gig. You know, like the first time I played a Zanaki's gig, I like practiced like every waking moment. I still didn't feel like I played it right. You know, like contemporary ensembles sometimes are just like, whoa, you know, like they're so great, but they take a lot of work, or, you know, it just depends on which symphony you get, right? How fast the conductor wants to play Mozart, you know?
Right.
Oh, I'm going to have to practice that, you know, or whatever.
Exactly.
So, let's play can we play your video here, and you give me some of your feedback to it. So I liked that you were playing the Gary Carr, the Gary Carr, but the
the Carr Kuzovitsky Amati bass. Yeah.
How was it? How was I played it once at the ISB.
It was,
and I almost.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, Aaron Riley from the Granary House set me up. This is going way back. This is like 2006 or something like this. I only wish I had a better camera. There are these tiny little clips. The only reason there are these little clips is because that's all the space I could do, and so it's just the microphone on the Canon 2 megapixel Pixma. So, but yeah, that's a recital from quite some time ago. So yeah.
So let's cue it up here. I just, before we started, like, it struck me that how wonderful it was that you were playing these pieces. Like, you were playing some of my favorite bass solos on the planet. You start with Meditation from bass. Whew, it's really wonderful. And you know, like, you're playing on this iconic, amazing bass, but I just want to say this to people listening, you know, like, think about how wonderful of the level of artistry that you have as a player. And I know you're kind of being humble now and talking about everything, but like, it's really, really wonderful. And that's why I want to play this, for people to enjoy some music, but also to hear your, you know, like, we spend our whole life learning to play a little bit more in tune every day, a little bit more beautiful. But I'm sure that even this first phrase that you play, somebody's hair is going to stand up on them, and they're going to be like, "Wow, that's really good." At least I'm hoping out there anyway. So get your popcorn ready. Here we go. did.
Look at that Canon Pixma footage.
Yeah.
But it's great to get what a cool opportunity, and just it's funny how those things work. And it was I appreciate you pulling that up.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. So I don't think my flow might be off, but so tell everyone how long. So you played through. You started about the same time, but you went to what college and where did you study? How long till you got to that point where you could play that level of virtuosity?
Oh.
That was great.
Oh, thanks, Johnny. Yeah, I went to Northwestern in Chicago, did a bachelor's and master's there. Went there to study with Jeff Braditich, but he had moved on to North Texas at that point. And wonderful bass player from the Chicago Symphony, Michael Hovnanian, took over the studio. So I studied with Michael. Played in the Civic Orchestra in Chicago for my master's while I was there, and then just sort of stuck around. Did fairly well at some auditions, and including some local auditions. So I started playing. Got a few local symphonic contracts, and was subbing with the Lyric Opera and different groups, and just. That's did the only recital, the only solo playing I had done between my master. The recital before that was my master's recital, so I hadn't really done a lot of that. But it was a cool opportunity. It was just one of those things. Aaron Riley, I had been supplying basses to some of my students and said, "Hey, I've got the Karl Kusevitsky. You wanna play it?" And the answer has to be yes. And the wonderful bassist from the Lyric Opera of Chicago, Greg Sarche, he facilitated that recital. It was at Northeastern Illinois University. Wonderful recital hall. So good memories. Thanks, Johnny. Appreciate that.
No, I think that's like I said about that. I wanted to end the podcast with this idea of our art, because that's as you grow as a person, obviously right now I'm watching my son. I miss your mom, so I'm not practicing for 3 hours a day. I don't get lost in the practice because he's going to crawl somewhere. So I play for 20 minutes, and then it's funny. He'll let me perform for him, but he won't let me practice, which means the minute I start repeating a phrase or a figure and I get the metronome out, he's like, he won't let me practice. So no practice for at least the first year of his life. Maybe when Francois calls me on the phone, he's like, "How's your practice?" I'm like, "I'm just playing." He's like, it's okay, because there's times where that happens.
Yeah, there's a season in life, right? That's the phrase I like. There's a season in life for everything,
and I think if we forget about the love of playing music, whether it's playing the bass and the bass underneath or whatever, even your heavy metal days is going to come back for you. I know it. But if we remember that, it will really, it just makes our teaching better. It makes your work, your creative work, and your online stuff better. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So this is my favorite part of Francois and George. What they kind of taught me was, when I was younger, it was all about playing, all the time, always getting better. Like if I heard something, I just had to go figure it out. And, I lost friends. I lost girlfriends because I was practicing. Sure.
It happens.
That's true. It happens to musicians, and we go to the woodshed, and it's quite intense. And what you just described, I mean, you got to be a really monster player to get professional classical work around Chicago, man. That's a big boy town, man. So it's a good one, and that's really cool. Einstein talked about how music was really his math, his science was music and everything. And it wasn't that when he played music, it relaxed him and he came up with all these great ideas. He saw it as one Like, I don't know if you've ever read about all of that stuff.
Yeah, I
but,
have.
oh, it's so
Yeah,
good.
that's cool.
So what I'm saying is, like, this idea of when people see, oh, you're a podcaster, oh, you're a teacher, but can you play like that? And the answer is, yeah, you could play like that. I mean, we're bass players, so we're not exactly like step up, or a guitar player would be like, come here, I'm going to shred your head off.
Yeah.
Like bass players aren't going to do that. But that's a really wonderful video. And I'm a big fan of you playing solo. So anytime you're playing, send it to me.
Sounds good,
I'd love
Johnny.
to
Well,
see it.
hopefully at a future time when we're together in person, we'll get to do some playing together, because I remember sitting at Silito's event a few years ago and listening to you do a recital, and I know that's a part of that event and other events. And so I'm sure we'll get a chance to make some music together coming up real soon here.
So I want to just briefly talk about my little artistry thing, my solo bass, and we'll end it on
Beautiful.
playing my track. I don't have a video of it. I mean, I do have a video of it, but I don't have I just got it back from the mastering. I'm just kind of waiting to find out when all my merchandise shows up, so I could have a record release party.
Cool.
And stuff like this. So this is the video game solo bass music. How it worked was that I call it the God Project because it's GAV7D, and all of my music is under the title V7 because the original band was Mr. Marcos V7, and it's all of my writing. It's all this kind of strange, weird instrumental music that I like, that's always been going through my head since I was a kid. And I always just wake up in the middle of the night and I have all these songs that I dreamed, and then I just write them down and out they come. So this God Project it's a 5-album project. So it's actually, the first album is all vocals, and so I wrote all these songs there's like 27 different singers on it from Kansas City music scene. They're my friends in the rock community, some jazz, I don't think there's any classical singers on there, but I probably would have used it, but it felt right. But so anyway, I wrote all these songs, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna make an instrumental album of the same one because I like instrumental music better than words myself. And so that idea of explaining that. Well, at the same time I was doing that project, I had all these people that's been in my band since I was in college moved back to Kansas City. And so I had to make an album for each one of these unique voices. So I have a punk funk polka record, which is brilliant. It kind of sounds like Faith No More gone polka,
Nice.
Which is really great. And then there's a Cartoon Noirs jazz record, which is all like most of my jazz growing up. I learned it through Bugs Bunny, and there's this really great composer named Raymond Scott, and all of that great cartoon music. And of course, it's also just my love of Charles Mingus, Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis. So it's kind of more of like a straight ahead record. And then I have a exotica, like Les Baxter and Esquivel and all that stuff, Middle Eastern free jazz record. And that's really brilliant because there's this that one isn't released yet either. It's getting ready to. I hope to release it here in June for sure. And then so I was hanging out in Paris with Sylvain Rabat, which is Francois' son, and what we realized was he was like on the same wavelength as me. So I went to his studio where he has all these amazing keyboards, and I have some pictures I need to show you because you got to check it out. And if you're ever in Paris, you should go sit down in his studio and create something. So we kind of improvise it. So this is just a little bit of his he's really into retro keyboards. And so like every one of these keyboards sounds totally like a different orchestra, and he's just brilliant at playing them, and he's a brilliant producer in the studio. So anyway, I was like, yeah, let's make a V7 track, and I'll put it on a V7 album. That was the idea first. I wasn't going to put a whole album out. But we just went nuts and made this other stuff happen. Let me pull up this other one, which is really, really good. Here's him playing a little bit of it. I just want to show you this because then you see his Moog and him playing this piece. This is my ode to Tetris. So check this out.
Nice. Very cool.
Which is really nice. And then I have one more picture to show because when you go in Paris, you get to, Sylvain is born and raised in Paris, and he is kind of unique Parisian, but I call it the Parisian scooter death ride. Oh, is that the right picture? No. And you get to, he gives you this helmet, but then he puts you on this terror. It's the same, that's his keyboards, or no? You see two guys in a helmet?
Yep.
You see two guys in a helmet?
I see two guys in a helmet.
Okay, cool. I don't see that. So anyway, you go on the streets of Paris with Sly, and he's just blazing down the road like way too fast on a scooter, because you can get places faster in New York, and probably Frisco's the same. Scooter, like people are like going in between cars and stuff. I'm scared for my life. It's really a great way to go to the studio and get ready to create music. So I wanted to show those pictures because he really is amazing at just he was just improvising that there. I just kind of played the main line, and like a rock musician, we just kind of built a lot of tracks over the basic idea. It's some theme that I pulled out of the vocal song, so it's a bigger thing than that. But anyway, I want to leave you with this last track because it's really nice. It has a nice upright solo at the beginning, and then it does both some electronic, the electric bass running through too many effects at once, and then some bowed stuff that kind of goes to a new place, I feel like, as far as where I was pleasantly surprised of where the whole album went to, because it's like the movie Tron, where I got sucked into Sly's keyboard world, and then I just put all my imagination on my affected bass stuff. So it's going to be a really cool album.
Cool.
So it should be out. So let's do it. And I should say, this is the last. If you listen to my podcast, I used my own music for the outro because I already had it.
Nice track. Like it, sir.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
So hopefully not only will the CD come out, but you can also get the sheet music and you can get the live track. What's nice is I could do that in a recital at, any workshop, but I can also pull into a rock and roll club and put those tracks underneath the speakers and, put on a crazy show for people. So it's been fun to do that. And I also have a cat suit that I dress up in and play along.
All right.
With. So,
well, I can't wait for it. Well, that's a good way to close it out, my friend.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me on your show, and thank you for coming on my show. 2 for 1.
You bet.
This is pretty exciting.
No kidding.
And again, I hope all the things that you do just keeps. I can't wait to hear what else you've put out there. I'm always I'm a good fan of yours.
Well, I of you as well. So we'll keep them rolling, my friend. Really appreciate it.
All right, you have a good night.
Hope you enjoyed the episode of Jammin' with Johnny and Casey Bass Stream. Please don't forget to check out johnnyhamel.com and caseybassworkshop.com to keep updated on what's new. I would also like to remind you that I'm an independent artist and music educator. I'll continue to shine the light on bass players and work to build cool creative community that does independent art. That includes my own. I deeply appreciate your support of the artists that are interviewed and to support the things that I do. On both websites there are donation buttons, marketplaces, merchandise, and like buttons. Every little bit helps.